You probably already knew that Torna is a prequel to Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Suikoden 4 and 5 are the prequels to the original trilogy. And allegedly Dragon Quest XI is a prequel to the entire series. But the next 10 JRPGs you're about to see today are also prequels and you probably didn't know about. So let's go meet them all and let's begin! Number 10. Final Fantasy XII. You know the Evilise Alliance, right? Well, it's a huge world Yasumi Matsuno created for Square Enix after he left the Ogre series behind. Several games take place in this world, such as all the Final Fantasy Tactics games actually. So apparently, Matsuno decided to properly explain the initial conflicts and origins of this Evilise kingdom in Final Fantasy XII. However, stories in every single game aren't related whatsoever. Each game is a standalone plot taking place in several different locations that rarely coincide. It's all about the lore and the background of this universe where you'll find most of the connections. Though I'd like to point out that it became official in the Final Fantasy XII Ultimania Omega, a Square Enix book about the games and Evilise itself. It confirms that the events of this game take place before the ones in Final Fantasy Tactics. But because they're barely connected in terms of story, characters and locations, I decided to leave it at number 10 as it isn't 100% a confirmed prequel. Number 9. Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals. I get the feeling it's one prequel you probably already knew about, but if you didn't, well, here's your story. Neverland, the developers of both Lufia games, felt the background and historical events told in the first Lufia deserved their own game. Hence, Lufia 2, although being chronologically the first game, was born. It takes place exactly 99 years before the Fortress of Doom. It therefore explains the beginning of the never-ending conflict between humanity and a bunch of gods called the Sinistrals. Finally, the story behind the ancestors of the first main character in Lufia 1 is told here. Now, most JRPGs that take place 1,000 years before or after another tend to be somewhat vague, right? They seem to be barely connected at all. Not the case in Lufia 2 though. If you play the first one and didn't understand certain things, its prequel explains them all. Especially on how the Sinistrals came to the world and the conflict against them began. Plus, it's a much better game in all sense of the word, so I strongly suggest you check it out first. Number 8. Growlancer 3 The Dual Darkness. Most of the very few people who got their hands on Growlancer Generations were left confused at first. Growlancer 2 The Sense of Justice, also included there, is a direct sequel of the first game we never got. So several events taking place in there, including the return of Carmine, the main character, as part of the supporting cast, were confusing. You don't necessarily need to play it to understand the Sense of Justice, and you can't anyway because it isn't even fan-translated yet. To make matters even worse, Growlancer Generations also included the prequel to them all, retitled as Growlancer 3. So it's not the third in chronological order, but the very first one in the series. It shows how a war between kingdoms is being fought over territories, and also, small spoiler alert, how the survivors migrated to another faraway place, which leads to the events of the first Growlancer. So now we can see why so many issues regarding the decaying land and the power of the sun fading. Upon playing this game, I'm pretty sure you'll understand a whole lot more than before. Too bad we still haven't gotten the game that ties the Sense of Justice and the Dual Darkness. Number 7. Phantasy Star 4. I just talked about this game in a recent video, so let me just explain why the hell is it here. Yes, the first 4 Phantasy Star games are deeply connected and take place in the same universe, all divided between 1,000 years each. However, contrary to popular belief, Sega decided to put a 2,000-year gap between Phantasy Star 2 and 3. What the hell happened between those two games, and why are things so vastly different? Well, that's where Phantasy Star 4 comes along, taking place 1000 years after 2 and before 3. How the malfunctional issues of Mother Brain and the sinister plot of some characters in the second game keep dragging on is what basically led to the events here. So in fact, it feels more connected to the first two games and acts as a direct sequel to them. But it's here as a prequel that you probably didn't know about of Phantasy Star 3. Therefore, while still a good game, Phantasy Star 3 is an alienation of the series. I'll never understand why it happened. Number 6. Lunar Dragon Song. Ever hoped there will be a prequel to the two classic Lunar games out there? Developers Game Art said nah and moved on to other projects like Grandia, for example. So a company called Japan Art Media and publisher Marvelous Interactive took over the project. So they disgracefully developed the absolute worst JRPG ever on the Nintendo DS, Lunar Dragon Song. Also known as Lunar Genesis, it takes place 1000 years before the events on the Silver Star. A convoluted race of almighty wizards are planning to control the goddess Althena. So it's up to a delivery boy and his childhood friend to stop them from taking over the world. I didn't want to include this unspeakable and obscene atrocity here, but I had to. Because this isn't about great prequels, it's about JRPGs you didn't know were prequels. So now you know, Dragon Song is the prequel nobody in this planet ever wanted of the two beloved classics out there. And that's it, I'm done talking about this putrid sack of dog shit, so let's continue. Number 5. Arno Surge, Ode to an Unborn Star. Why did I decide to include an extremely obscure game in this list? Because I just felt you needed to know, that's all. Ever heard of those Art on Helico games? Kinky RPGs that formed the trilogy on the PS2 and 3? Well, after those, a visual novel life simulator was released on the PS Vita called Ciel no Surge. And it coincidentally explains how the human race went to live in a space station after planet Raziel was destroyed by the sun. Ciel no Surge was exclusive to Japan and it still is nowadays, sadly. But its very direct sequel, now a JRPG, Arno Surge, was released afterwards worldwide. Humanity is still traveling through space and the station, or rather the ship, is going through a lack of resources. Nonetheless, the events of this game happen in a distant part of the universe until they make contact with the tower called RCL. In this other part of the universe, humans live in towers, huh? So if you ever played the Art on Helico games and wondered why humans live in those strange towers, well, if you play Arno Surge, you'll know. Number 4. Drakengard 3. Yep, it's hard to believe, but this insanely dark, twisted and humorous game is the prequel to the other two games. Why was it called 3 and not Origins or something else? Beats me, marketing strategies probably. It occurs 100 years before the first Drakengard. The timeline, however, is confusing as hell and seems unrelated to it. But it all comes together thanks to the narrations of Accord, an android created by the old world that documents all timelines. It's a long-ass chronology and you can read it if you want to in a link I'll leave in the description below. It just goes on to how the events of one of the endings in Drakengard 3 leads to Drakengard 1 with a different ending that leads to Nier? Yeah. Look, this is Yoko Taro we're talking about. His way of storytelling and unifying timelines is bizarre at best, so try out the link I left and see for yourself, because obviously heavy spoilers are there that proves Drakengard 3 is indeed a prequel to the first game. Number 3. Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Donna. What, you thought this was just the sequel to Ys 7 and prequel to the recently released Ys 9? Well, you thought wrong. The Ys chronology is another mess out there as the games are released through Adol's different adventures. Nowhere near as messy as the Drakengard timeline, thankfully. It's just that Falcom decided to randomly create prequels to sequels and sequels to prequels for no reason. So no, chronologically speaking, Ys 8 isn't one of the latest in the series. It's actually a prequel to both Ys 6 and 7. After the events of Ys 5, where Adol discovered the mysteries of the lost city Kefin, he and Doggy embarked on a new journey. The path between Kefin in the continent of Sandria to Eriscia is intertwined by the Goethi Sea. That's where Ys 8 starts off, when the ship Lombardia is attacked, leaving Adol, Doggy, and several different characters stranded on a new island. After the events of Ys 8, Adol travels to other places not yet revealed on any game. All we know is that eventually, 2 years later after Lacrimosa of Donna, he is on another ship, falls off of it, and washes ashore the Canaan Islands. Interesting, huh? Anyway, I'll leave a link to the Ys timeline in the description. Number 2. Tales of Symphonia. You know how Tales of Berseria is a prequel to Zestiria, right? Taking place 1000 years earlier? Well, guess what? The exact same thing happened with Tales of Symphonia and Tales of Fantasia. The latter takes place in the world of Asilia, and it explains during the plot all the lore and background surrounding the Ragnarok War. The people of Asilia in Fantasia have no memories of this, however, but that's a different plot. If you've played Symphonia 1 and 2, the term Asilia sounds familiar, doesn't it? If you haven't, I don't want to spoil anything for you. Let's just say you need to finish Symphonia 1 at least to understand how the world of Asilia came into existence. After that, and if you've played Fantasia, you'll immediately notice the connection. But that's all actually. Each game is a standalone title and you don't need to play one to understand the other. It just baffles me to think Lloyd existed way before Kless did. Just sounds messed up for some reason. Number 1. Fire Emblem: The Blazing Sword. The very first Fire Emblem we ever got localized is a prequel to Fire Emblem: The Binding Blade, which came first but stayed in Japan. I put this game on the first place because it is the only one that's a direct prequel to its predecessor. You played with the previous generation of characters, most specifically Eliwood and Hector. These two are the fathers of the two protagonists of The Binding Blade, Roy and Lilina. While all the other games here were the classic 1000 or 100 years before, the Blazing Sword's not even 20, so a big part of the conflict that you see in The Binding Blade, if you ever played it of course, carries over from the one in this masterpiece. A very important scene and mission here is crucial to the overall plot in the other one actually. I'm flabbergasted to see that we got a prequel to a game we never got, but well, we also saw that with that Girl Lancer game before, huh? Why wasn't The Binding Blade localized first? I don't get it. But at least no one was confused because in the end, chronologically speaking, we got the first game in that duology. Did you also know that Star Ocean: The Last Hope is the prequel to the entire series? Yeah, you probably did. What about Valkyrie Profile 2? It acts as both a prequel and a sequel to the original. You probably already knew that too. Those are the only honorable mentions I have. Alright, if you have more of them, let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time!